Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today for Family Ties, Arleene Correa Valencia and Carmen Argote in Conversation. My name is Lindsay Hamill, and I'm the Director of Education and Public Programs here at UCR Arts, the California Museum of Photography, and Culver Center of the Arts. Before we begin, I would like to respectfully acknowledge and recognize our responsibility to the original and current caretakers of this land, water, and air, the Cahuilla, Gabrielino Tongva, Luiseño, and Serrano peoples, and all of their ancestors and descendants, past, present, and future. Today, this meeting place is home to many Indigenous peoples from all over the world, including UCR faculty, students, and staff, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on these homelands. Today's conversation is the first in a series of public programs in conjunction with the exhibition Transgresoras, Mail, Art, and Messages, 1960s to 2020, currently on view at the California Museum of Photography through February 15th, 2026. Today's program will begin with a conversation between the curators and artists, which at the end we'll have about 15 minutes for Q&A as well. After that, we'll move into, we'll have a quick break, and then we'll move into the gallery for a curator and artist-led tour of the exhibition. Transgresoras is curated by Zanna Gilbert, Senior Research Specialist at Getty Research Institute, and Elena Shtromberg, Professor of Art History at University of Utah. I'll now hand it over to the curators to introduce the artists.
Thank you. Thanks, Lindsay. I'm Zanna Gilbert. I am going to be introducing Carmen, and Elena is going to introduce Arleene. So Carmen Argote lives and works in Los Angeles and received an MFA and BFA from UCLA. They're multidisciplinary artists who points to the body class and economic structures in relation to architecture and personal history. Argote's practice draws upon their immediate environment and the networks of labor and consumption that mark these spaces. They manifest these connections through drawings, paintings, sculpture, installation, video, and performance, and we should say prints, that directly reference the visual language of abstraction. They've had solo exhibitions at Pitzer College Galleries at Claremont, and that exhibition is up now until December 6th, so please go visit. It's not that far from Riverside. Commonwealth and Council, ICA LA, among others. They're the recipient of many awards, including the City of L.A. Department of Cultural Affairs Independent Master Artist Award. Congratulations from this year. They're represented by Commonwealth and Council, LA, and serve as co-chair of the Artist Council at the ICA LA. Argote's work is in many other collections, such as the Hammer Museum, LACMA, and many other museums. And we're really delighted to welcome you here, and Arleene, today, and just so happy to have your work in the show.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Is this okay? Happy to have you here on a Saturday afternoon, and happy to share our exhibit and the artists directly to talk about their works there. I'm going to introduce Arleene Correa Valencia. She is an inaugural recipient of the Bay Area Fellowship at Headland Center for the Arts and received a regional Emmy Award for her feature Represent, a portrait of Napa workers, Arleene Correa Valencia by KQED Arts. In 2023, Correa Valencia was named a Eureka Fellow by the Fleischhacker Foundation and a finalist for the SECA Award through the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. Correa Valencia received her MFA from California College of the Arts. One of 4 children originally from Arteaga, Michoacan in Mexico, Correa Valencia is the beneficiary of DACA and is on a path to becoming a naturalized citizen of the United States. The Correa Valencia family fled to the United States in 1997 and found home in California's Napa Valley. Her work is held in the permanent collections of the Cantor Arts Center at Stanford University, Crocker Art Museum, the Utah Museum of Fine Arts, which is where I first met her, and among others. She is represented by Catherine Clark Gallery since 2022. And I thought we could start the conversation by having the artists talk a little bit about their works in the exhibit, just so you could hear it from them. We'll do a kind of broader tour, but I think the sort of insight of the artists into their work would be really interesting. So yeah, we'll turn it over to you. We have the two, both works are pictured here in the slideshow. And maybe we can start with Carmen and you could talk about your work, and then we'll move over to Arleene to talk about your work.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay, great. So maybe we can get, I wonder if we can get a closer picture of, yeah, any of these is good. So I want to describe I want to begin by describing what the work is. The works are prints, and it is a collaboration with Eric Guerrero, who's a printmaker. But the original material comes from these letters that my father would write me from Guadalajara, Mexico. So as I grew up in Los Angeles since I was 4, and there was a lot of correspondence from my dad in the early years, maybe like when I was, I don't know, like 10 or 11, 12, 13, where he would go to Mexico because he was building a house. There was always like the story very present in my mind growing up that he was building a house. And then the idea was that when he would finish building this house, we would all go back to Mexico. And that was the sort of narrative that was kind of in the background. So a lot of these letters kind of share a little bit of that, but the letters were always kind of distant. You know, they were almost like, oh, the weather here is fine, you know, take care of your mom and sister, like these very generalized kind of like letters. And I often had, while I wanted like that contact or closeness, there was like some distance that was felt through the letter. So part of the process in kind of finding these letters and going back through these letters and reading these letters and trying to connect presently with them was to sort of almost like with a color pencil, read them very slowly. And as I would read them, almost like cross out parts that maybe were not connecting with me as much to allow something else to surface. And I thought about these maybe as poems in some way, where there was a sort of editing, like a transparent editing, where you could kind of see a little bit of the process. You could still read the back, but you know, what would kind of seep, like this one says hijas, and it's crossed out. Ahora que el clima de California ha mejorado, which translates to like daughters, now that the weather in California has gotten better or has improved, you know? And it's just like these, like, in a way they were like, I wanted to try to reflect what I sensed the letters were about, or the points of connection, or what actually stayed with me. To kind of reflect the relationship. I'm not actually close to my father. We don't speak anymore. But I think in the process of remothering, what I call remothering the self and tending to my inner child, this method of physically almost like going back into the letter and allowing these new poems that I could connect with to surface were part of allowing, a certain acceptance, and also tending to my inner child. And then that's next to a wood block that is made by, I don't know how to describe it, but it's like, I worked with Eric Guerrero, and he developed, who's a printmaker, and he developed and designed this wood block that would take an impression very easily when I hit it up against something. So I went to these gravestones that said mother, like, and there's like these gravestones that say mother, and I thought about like whose mother. Within the word mother, there's other and her, and part of my process is walking, and so I would walk to the cemetery, and it's this one actually that I used, where I would take the wood block, and there was an impact, and I call them impact prints. And when you impact and hit the gravestone, it creates like these dents, which you can see right there. And the beautiful thing about printmaking, right, is that it hits it in a certain way that's like reversed, but then when you print it, it's readable again. So it's like a mirroring. So a lot of this work is, for me, deeply psychological. It's a remothering process. It's about like mirroring, reflection, these like developmental stages of processing, these presences and tending to the inner child.
Would you be able to say just a little bit more about this process of remothering and how you see that and connect that through your art making? Because you also have some more like embodied performances where you have Elena and I came to watch your performance at the ICA-LA, where you and your mother were attached by rope, and is that part of that process?
Yeah, I mean, the larger body of work, I think about as this remothering process. And at the ICA-LA, the larger body of work was framed with the title of the show, which was "I Won't Abandon You, I See You, We Are Safe." That was like the kind of when it was presented. I think when we were talking about contact and impact and sensations that are held in the body. A big influence on me was like reading The Body Keeps the Score, which is like this book about like, how information is kind of held within the body. And so through action, through whether I call them performances or actions onto material, there's something that happens that's like a sort of processing of emotions, things that are held in the body are allowed to come out. And I think that this work, this print series, in a way documents these actions. So it's both a print, but it's also a process of documentation of an action. And I think that's something that's shared across the work through the works in the Mother series, or in that process of remothering, where it's these actions, and then the artwork is both artwork and documentation of an action.
And if the next slide, did you want to say?
Oh yeah, maybe if we could go back to the other one. This is probably the desk where my father wrote the letters, which I thought it was just interesting to share. But this is like, a picture of my father at a distance, maybe the desk where he wrote it. And then this is a picture of me and my mother in L.A. in front of Lafayette Park. So you see like these two spaces. One is in Guadalajara, and then this one is in Los Angeles. And then if we could, and then these were the sort of architectural plans of the houses that he wanted to build. So this idea of this house that was somewhere else in Guadalajara existed for me through like this portfolio that he left in Los Angeles, and of these houses this house that he was building for our family. And you can see it's like very like this picture of like this idealized suburban place, that's supposed to be somewhere in Mexico. So there's a lot of these gaps that, I think when I was growing up, I had to kind of, feel and imagine.
And then you talked about working with Eric. We have a few images of
Eric right there. Yeah, working with Eric Guerra was an amazing process, really collaborative, and there was actually a lot of correspondence between us in the process. And so this is actually the original letter, and you can see how there was some color changes in the final print to kind of unite compositionally, almost like the wood block, which is like this beautiful process that he does with the inkjet. That's also folded to suggest a letter. So like, even though the print is a print, it still references the letter form with the original creases of the original letter. You can see it right there. So it definitely, in a way, like references its source, even though compositionally it's a printed, material. And then maybe if we could go back to the one, this one. So this is like this woodblock process. I mean, trying to lift a woodblock print that's almost the same a certain number of times, and every time you press onto this very soft block, it almost like loses a little bit of information. So there was they had like a lifespan. You could only get, just a few, because of the tendency of this wood to be so soft. So it was so soft that it allowed the impact to kind of really press into it by the hitting. But that meant that when you printed it, every time you printed it, it also kind of like flattened it a little bit. So it also limited the I don't know, like the seriality of the print, which was really nice.
And maybe it's worth mentioning that that's not like the usual way you would make, like people would go about making a matrix, or so you like to walk a lot. Is this something that came up as you were walking in the cemetery, or where did that moment come where you decided you wanted to make a print from the gravestone?
Yeah, I mean, I have a walking practice, and especially during lockdown, during the pandemic, I would take these specific routes, and my main route was going to Evergreen Cemetery in Boyle Heights, and which is pictured right here. And at Evergreen Cemetery, there are these grave markers that say mother, and my first process was to make rubbings. And upon making rubbings, that's when I began to see that mother contained the word other and her. And I started asking myself, who's mother and who is her? Who is other? And it was in that question that then the body of work began to take form, or, I would come in and walk and take more rubbings and think about what this meant. And rubbings on paper, on fabric. And then when Eric and I were talking about making prints, he was also very drawn to, the images I was sharing with him about of these gravestones. And I was looking at these letters and processing grief, I would say, through the sort of coloring and editing on the letters, not originally to make art, but to make poetry for myself. And so then I had this material of life. I think my best artwork comes when I take the stuff of life and sort of resurface it in some way. So I was already doing these kind of this action of I guess covering up parts of it. And I thought that these letters with maybe when Eric is like, I want to make a woodblock print. And I'm like, interesting. Okay, well, how could we make it work? How can I kind of converse with your wanting to make a woodblock print? Where do I enter it? Let's see if I can make it work. And I started to hit, and basically what's the impact of the, mother figure? Or what's the impact of myself doing this process of remothering? And I was thinking about printmaking, and I was thinking about impact. And then so physically, just that's what led me to want to do that action at the cemetery.
And the oh, do you mind going back to the previous? I mean, it's very striking that thinking about, and we'll go into this more in the conversation, but thinking about like this cold desk and the distance of the letter, and then like the physical relationship between you and the making this matrix. But I wondered if you could maybe just before we move on to Arleene, talk about the red material that you're using here, which doesn't appear in the print, but I thought people might be curious what that is.
Yeah, at the time I was rubbing with crayons, and Los Angeles gets very hot, and so I would like rub with crayons, and the crayons would melt in my hand. And there was like this moment where I would like squeeze the melted crayon, and it was like a little strawberry. Mm-hmm. And then I would like, use this almost like strawberry like crayon to make rubbings, and I was very much in this. It's a beautiful place to be, and I like this. I don't know if it's like delirium or like this place of making and being in action, and I actually really strive and long to be there, and I'm not always able to. But at the time, I was in that process of just being in that moment, and then that's where like those like little red, I don't know, strawberry crayon things happened.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's it's so interesting that at the base of these two artists' works, we have this correspondence with a father figure. And I think I'd like to turn to Arleene to talk about maybe some of the ways, first describe the work and talk a little bit about the work, but also think about maybe some of the ways in which the work is so different, despite the fact that there's a kind of correspondence as a foundation.
Yeah, and a very different relationship to father. Yes. My work at large focuses on understanding patterns of migration by tracking my family's migration. Like you mentioned earlier, I'm originally from Arteaga, Michoacan. I was born there, and I came to the U.S. when I was 3 years old. And at this moment when we were separated, I think very much like what you said, I also read The Body Keeps the Score while going through therapy and thinking about how the body holds on to painful memories and they resurface at certain times, like if the weather changes or if like something brings up an emotion, that feeling comes back even, and we might not understand why we're scared or why we're sad or why we feel that. So I, for a long time, have been exploring the feeling of just being lonely and what that means to me. And the earliest memory that I have is not a visual memory, but it's a feeling. It's a memory of being abandoned and dad leaving. And so I'm quite the opposite. I'm so close to my father. He's my best friend and the love of my soul. And have a harder relationship with mother. But when dad was gone, I felt abandoned, even though my mom was there to care for me. And so there's this archive of 40-something letters that I have that my mother and I and my brother wrote to dad for almost a year. And there are notes. I was 3, so obviously I didn't know how to write, but mom would hold my hand and we would write out the messages that I wanted to send to dad. And there are so much information in the letters. And there's so many like funny drawings that I have no idea what they mean, but they meant something to me at the time. So for me, I consider these my first artworks of communicating feelings of abandonment that come with so much love, right? I think what I'm really interested in the work in general is looking at moments that contradict themselves, where like, this is the most painful memory that my body has held on to. It's also the most loving thing that my body has ever been through, because my father left looking for opportunity, looking for the dream, wishing that I would be here talking to all of you today. Like, this is what he wanted for me. And we were able to make it happen, right? But it wouldn't happen without the cost of this extreme family separation and pain. So these letters to me are the foundation of my practice and my understanding of the world, my understanding of relationship to each other. And in the letters, there are messages that were written that are really sweet and really simple. Like at the bottom, it says, te quiero mucho, yo no me olvido de ti, te extraño, llévame contigo, which translates to, I love you so much, I will never forget you, I miss you, take me with you. And, you know, I think we as human beings are like so caught up sometimes in the language of communication and how we communicate and whether we're saying things right or wrong. And as a bilingual person, I feel like I'm often not communicating correctly, but children teach us that we actually can express ourselves in the most distilled ways that are actually, that we don't need like academic language. We don't need the fancy things. We can actually just say what it is in 3 words, like I will never forget you. And that that takes on the entire world, right? So yeah, the letter that you'll see on view in the frame is a letter that I wrote to my father with my mom attached to a photograph, which is another thing that I'm really interested in, is how letters and photographs are ways of communicating and ways of being present with each other when we're not capable of doing that.
And I wanted to ask you about the textile, because that's something we didn't include, but that has a kind of relationship too. So we're queuing that up. But yeah, can you talk about the role of textile in
Yeah. So I went to school for painting, and my father always wanted to be a painter. That was his dream. Unfortunately, it was not in the cards for him when he was younger. He had no art education or arts training at all. But we are an arts family. We grew up like sitting at the dining room table, looking at the color brown and talking about all the ways in which it exists in the world.
That's amazing.
Yeah. But it wasn't like, there was no art terms. And to this day, if I go home to Dad and I'm like, oh, you know, in color theory, there's la la la. He's like, what? I don't know. He's like, I don't, put your degree away. Like we talk about like the earth, you know, and like the connections to the earth, which is really a beautiful way to understand art in its raw, full, natural way. So I wanted to be a painter. I wanted to be an oil painter. And I thought that was the height of art for myself, because I wanted to make my father's dream come true in the way that like he gave me the world by bringing me here. So I constantly want to give him the world. But my paintings have never done well. Like my oil paintings have never done well. And it wasn't until 2020 during the pandemic that I unfortunately had to go through a double mastectomy and reconstruction while also living with my in-laws. And I was locked out of my studio during pandemic. Like many people didn't have access to a lot of things. And my mother-in-law said to me, well, let's make a painting with the sewing machine. And I said to her, you're crazy. I have an MFA. Like, there's no way. But then after a few days, I was like, okay, teach me how to sew. And then I learned through her, I think a lot of what I believe to be my best artwork comes from education at the dining room table with my parents, not from, I mean, I love school and I love academia, but what I hold dearest to my heart is the conversations with my elders and with my community. And it was in that moment that Mom, who is a survivor of a civil war in El Salvador and fled the civil war in El Salvador, was telling me about how she used embroidery as a way to survive as a young child, and how Fernando Hort taught her how to paint these beautiful birds in the mountains of El Salvador, and how she would do that as a child and sell that in the market and feed her family that way. And so then for me, it was really much like the investigation of textiles was now like the ancestral language that was actually left for me to use. And it was when I was exploring this relationship with my father and thinking about the absence of the parent and the like child wanting to exist with the parent and not being able to, that I was able to cut my father's clothing and put it back together in the same way that my body was being reconstructed and put back together. So in the textiles, there's very much this question about how we break things apart and reconstruct each other in a different way through the act of hurting. So right, like the sewing machine and the act of sewing is so important to me, because we're deconstructing and we're creating una herida, like a wound, and then we're going in and we're putting it back together. And something that that is completely new, that has never existed before. And so in these textiles, I'm often recreating photographs that were sent to my father. So on the left is my brother and I, where I think he had sent us those sweatshirts from the US, because my brother's sweatshirt says America. And I cannot imagine my mother buying an America sweatshirt in Mexico. And so there was these like tangible exchanges that were had between my father and I through the mail. And then we sent back a picture to say like, oh, here are your two kids in their really cool tracksuits that you sent them. And this like exchange of love existed. And then I put them together with my nieces now. So this is my niece, Arleene, who is the firstborn American citizen in my family. And like first generation, to not have these issues of being undocumented and not having access to home, and really thinking about the differences that children, the way that children can experience life differently, whether or not they've been separated by their parents, but also there's like this universal separation that all of us are going to feel in this room, right? Like we're all going to feel separated from the person that we love the most, regardless of our status and regardless of our social economic status and where we come from. And so the idea of family separation is just not just tied to migration, but it's more tied to the human experience.
Thank you. I got a little teary. It's very moving. I guess one question I wanted to ask both of you in thinking about your practices is, at what point you decided that you wanted to rework or reframe your personal correspondence as a kind of more public work of art. So it has this very private tenor and then becomes very public with people viewing that very private tenor. And so maybe talk about that first instance where you decided to do that, and then some of the challenges that you encountered with having that kind of personal correspondence made so public.
Yeah, I think when I think back to the works in the series that have to do with the remothering process, a lot of what I wanted to share was, I mean, first, just that the process that I was going through and kind of deconstructing, let's say, like a lot of things that I had held on to, or like stories, and trying to understand them now as an adult, and trying to almost like shed and remix and rebuild and sort of process. I think walking was also a huge part of that. So I did that a lot by walking and also by making. But I also wanted to share, I think, the tools, because these are tools as I was, learning more about, as I became more interested about like in my own psychological processing and deconstruction. And I became more aware of, teachings, like, let's say, like even teachings like Buddhist teachings. I was looking at a lot of writings by Thich Nhat Hanh. I was also like reading a lot of like Winnicott, who's a child psychologist. I was looking at C.G. Jung. I was reading a lot of, there's like this writer that I really like named Clarissa Pinkola Estes. So I was reading a lot of her books. Also a lot of just like all of these like amazing writers and poets, and I was like allowing a lot of other voices to kind of enter my way of knowing. I wanted to share what I was finding out through my artwork, and I wanted to present it, like I wanted to share my tools, because I realized that growing up, perhaps, my family hadn't had the tools to be able to process a lot of these things. Like they had been lost somehow or forgotten, or there had been an emphasis, let's say, on like isolation, individualism, and the nuclear family. And a lot of these, whether it was like healing in community had been kind of like lost, or even like looking at conflict from different vantage points as like a space of potentiality for greater intimacy had been kind of like lost. There had been like a lot of things that I think in the letting go and in the deconstruction and reconstruction I was learning, and the body of work that was made through action and processing was sort of teaching me that. I always think that artwork is a conversation. And so I was in conversation with the art and the material, and I wanted to share that, what the conversation was teaching me with others through my art making. I think that's something that was like really kind of coming forward for me.
Yeah, thank you.
And for me, can we show the picture of the mural, maybe? Yeah, so on the left is the mural that you can see in the show. It's the second iteration of transforming a letter into a mural. We met, and you saw the first one I did at the Utah Museum of Art. And my relationship to the letters is very private. And it's really hard to read the letters. I have them in my studio, and sometimes if I want to cry, I just read them. Or if I feel like I need to refresh my memory, I read them. Or if I feel like I need to get closer to my dad when he was in his early 30s, I read them. And so there was a point where I was talking about the letters in the artwork, and then I was like, well, why don't I just show them? Because I think that there's so much power in the action of how we write, not just as adults, but like as children too. Like we have so much of ourselves and our energy in how we leave our mark. So I started showing the letters next to the paintings. And then for my solo show at the Utah Museum of Art, I wanted to take the letter and make it in a format that honored my dad's dreams of being a painter. And this is where I thought, okay, well, I can bring painting into the conversation, and bring my dad physically into the conversation. And then he's been a painter his whole life and has always worked with Benjamin Moore. So we bought Benjamin Moore paint in the museum, and then I wore his Benjamin Moore outfit. And so it was this ritual of honoring my dad as a house painter and making a mural that was how he fed me and my family, and sharing that in a museum setting or in a gallery setting. And then more recently, I've been thinking about how muralism is such a communal experience of sharing who we are and feeling visible, feeling seen, and in a place where the arts can be so closed off to our communities. Especially, I think about myself as a child. I didn't visit a museum until I was in high school. I didn't have access to arts, galleries, education, and any of that until much later in my life. And so the only ways that I got to experience art was through the public realm, through walking down the street and seeing the graffiti or seeing things that were left behind by our community. And then I grew up in Napa, so there was not much that I could connect to or that I would feel was reflective of my community. I think y'all are very lucky here in LA. You have amazing, amazing murals. And we have incredible murals in San Francisco that reflect our community. But even access to San Francisco was very cut off for my family because my parents worked so much that we didn't go to San Francisco. That was not like, I think my dad's never even been really to San Francisco if ever in his life as a vacation thing or to explore the city. And so you can live in this nuclear place and be so detained by it and contained by it that you almost don't see the world around you. So muralism for me is a way to bring that to the community and to share that we are all living the same experience, right? So in this mural, I took different parts of letters and put them together. And then I took the outside of the envelope where the letters are mailed and made that the frame of the letter itself, because there's something about taking the private and turning it into a public experience that is really communal for me, and it makes it universal. It makes it so that it's not just about me, but it's about all of us. I was really blessed to be able to make this mural with my friend Citramina Mejia, whose family is an amazing tattoo family here in LA. And so the making of the mural itself was in community with other families that are focusing on the arts and using the arts as a way to continue cultural practices. So I'm just like, I think that, I mean, the murals themselves tie everything together for me. It's the painting, it's the history, it's the migration, and it's more importantly, the act of existing together in community.
Thank you. It's so interesting that a letter, something so intimate and became a mural. Like there's such a discrepancy between those two, and yet it sort of comes together really beautifully.
It reminds me a little bit of the dialogue we have in the show between, everyone will have seen coming in, the open mouths that were posters that were wheat pasted around on the streets as part of a campaign that the artist Graciela Sacco was doing. But she also made them in miniatures, like little postage stamps that would travel around. So there's that play with scale and with public address as well in those works. I wanted to give Carmen a chance to respond a little bit to what Arleene had said about sewing and painting, because it struck me that there's a kind of similar relationship there between, you have your series of failed paintings and you've been working with sewing a lot recently, and that there's this dialogue. And I think one of the things that we all were talking about before the talk was about how male art proposes a different hierarchy for arts, and a different sensibility around what counts as an artwork. But I wondered if you wanted to respond to Arleene there.
Yeah, I was so excited to hear about sewing as well. My mother sews and my grandmother sews, and I recently learned how to sew this year. And sewing for my grandmother was also a way for her to earn money for her family in Guadalajara. This is my grandmother on my mom's side, also named Carmen. My mother's also named Carmen. So I'm the third. And there was some kind of, there was a little bit of resistance to take on sewing for a while. I feel like I'm oh, they have this. They've got this. I'm gonna do I'm gonna do painting, right? But what I've learned about sewing has been so interesting. My project at Pitzer is about sewing. And pattern making, which my mom also studied. But first learning how to sew was it's so scary to learn a new skill. So that was the first kind of thing that when we take on skills, even when we've grown up with them, the actual doing of that skill, there's it actually is experienced. It's taken in through the body again, and there's fear, and there's novelty, and there's all those things. But I was surprised that sewing really offered me a pause from chaos. And I thought about how sewing functioned maybe for my grandmother, and I talked to my mother about this, and I was I wonder if it offered my grandmother a pause from the chaos in her life. And this was after I was noticing that it was doing that for me. Earlier this year, we had the fires, we had the election, and then just, personal, things in my life that were going on. But I was surprised that the concentration and the oficio, offered me a place of, if not rest, in the sense of a place of pause, and it carved out a space for myself as a person. And then I started to reflect how sewing had offered a place for the women in my family to maybe maintain a part of themselves, or to hold that part of themselves within, maybe systems of highly patriarchal systems, or really through moments of difficulty. So I really started to value sewing as in its ability to carve out and help specifically the women in my family hold space for themselves through time, even though it was still the doing, but it there was this other side to it that I hadn't understood without actually, doing it. Yeah.
One thing that I'm thinking about in you discussing sewing, and you thinking about the ways in which murals or just this kind of trauma and coming to terms with it, that was so much of what guided, a lot of our decisions in the kinds of research we did. There's so many shared affinities that I can recognize, between and among your work and the works of the artists in the exhibit. I'm curious if in the very brief encounter you had with the works there, if there was something that spoke to you or a theme that you felt you really resonated with kind of some of your works.
Okay, I'll answer first. And please remind me the artist because I forgot. It's the postcards that have the different perspectives of the city.
Of Lima?
Yeah.
Hilda Mantilla.
Hilda Mantilla. So if y'all go to the exhibition, there's takeaways of postcards that you can view different perspectives of Lima that are non-traditional. So they're more like the way that the local people would see the city and experience the city. And I felt really connected to that because one, I'm thinking about how our memories of home. I was 3 when I got to the States, but I feel like I know my home. And the first time I was able to go back to Michoacan and see my grandfather's house, I felt like, even though it had changed so much and it's no longer in the family, I felt like I understood that feeling of being home. And I was there, but it was not something that I could look up, or it was not something that I could access on the internet, because it's not an accurate representation of what people think of Michoacan or what people think of Mexico. Mm-hmm. And so I really enjoy these perspectives of getting an insight of what home is to people. Mm-hmm. And then more connected to the work or into my letters, I'm really thinking about how home changes for us, right? How home can be there and it can be here. Mm-hmm. And it can be this like in between that no one else will recognize but ourselves. And then lastly, I'm also just thinking about growing up in Napa and how most people know Napa as the cover of Wine magazine or, like some crazy expensive Michelin star restaurant. But if I was to show you images of what Napa means to me, you would not know that they're ever in Napa, right? Like that, it would be so different. So I really enjoy those intimate perspectives.
It's kind of like the discrepancy between the personal and the private, like your own private reflection on place. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
And I was really drawn to, is it the artist who did the Mama Blanca?
Graciela Gutierrez Max.
So in sort of like seeing the work, and I guess the artist invited both like people in the community and family also, but like this idea of extended family to send the artist's mother like birthday correspondences, birthday gifts, or birthday offerings. Mm-hmm. And I started thinking about how valuable this idea of like working outside of the nuclear family, this like extended family or extended support is in terms of, I think about my parents and the notions of the nuclear family, even the notions of like home looking like a house, that contains like these parental figures and the kids, like, and that's it. That like who it's excluding, and how that's really like how community then is really missed, and how one feels very isolated, and so it was really interesting to see this other kind of community supporting a mother. This idea of like, what are the different ways that others, in addition to family, can support a mother, a father, a family. So what are the workings outside of the nuclear family, and how do we deconstruct that? I mean, and I think ultimately to gain greater awareness of tools and just of relationship and navigations and healing and strategies and all of these things. So really feeling the I guess the effects of capitalism, and also notions of assimilation and like these aspirational things, and like kind of like these are the things that I think in the remothering I've been trying to deconstruct, and then to allow other things to open.
Thank you. I think we can open up to Q&A, but before we do, I also want to say that I had mentioned Carmen's show at Pitzer College, but there's Arleene is, if you want to see more of Arlene's work, there is a show that's going to open shortly that is LACE, Los Angeles Contemporary Art Exhibitions at the Luckman Gallery. And Arleene has work in that show as well. So there's plenty of opportunities to see more of both Carmen and Arlene's work.
When does that open?
I believe November 1st.
Okay.
Something
Next
like
week?
that. Yeah.
Perfect.
And do we have any questions in the audience?
If you have any questions, if you could raise your hand and I'll bring the mic to you so we can capture that. From in here.
We can also talk as we go through the exhibition if people want to do that. Oh, here's one.
Going through the show, I definitely was thinking about legibility and what can be read and what can't be, and redaction and erasure and all these things that of like reconstructing language or deconstructing it, exploding it. And I don't know, how do you both think about what is legible, what can be read, what can't be read? I don't know if that was something you were thinking about.
That's such a good question. It's really, I think, valid to how we thought about the show, but also valid in your work.
Yeah. Well, okay. So my letter's in Spanish, and I know that limits access if you're not Spanish speaking. I honestly, I don't think that I often think about whether or not it translates to people, because I have not had access to a lot of things in my whole life. So if you don't have access to reading my letter and you don't make the effort to translate it yourself, then it's sort of kind of like you're not worthy of understanding the message, and you can take away what you need to take away from the colors or what you do understand. But the experience of being undocumented is figuring out how to translate things that you don't understand in a system that was not made for you, and that's actually stacked against you. And so I very strongly believe in not always giving access and allowing the viewer to try a little bit, right? To work a little bit, because I think we have everything given and handed to us in life. So the challenge of being forced to work a little bit is not at all comparable to being undocumented, but it's a start. And so I think it's powerful to not always have everything.
I also think about, my work is also in Spanish. And also I was thinking about redaction. But there's like this work in the exhibition that has like redaction to cover up and hide.
Yeah, volus paharpas. Yeah.
And but in my work, it's not about hiding so much as an action for myself to process or to almost like push back the things that don't really connect. Like I said, the letters were felt kind of distant. So everything that didn't really connect was almost like pushed back through like this covering up with the color pencil or coloring in. And then the things that were like allowed to surface, those were the things that created this new kind of poem. So it wasn't like an editing, but and a redaction, but not with the idea of omitting, like, and erasing completely, but almost like pushing back and like letting things come forward.
Well, I was going to say curatorially as well, we wanted to make things as accessible as possible, but then it's a multilingual show. So I think there are some things that can be accessible to some people, depending on the language, right? We have Portuguese, we have Spanish, we have English, we have some indigenous languages. So I think that there's also, there are sort of different points at which things are accessible depending on who the visitor is. And there's, I think there's a lot of text in the show in general that, you can sort of choose to engage with to the degree that you want to kind of get involved or really want to know a lot about the work, or you can absorb it like visually, or what you can learn from the work just by looking at it. And I think you can learn that way too.
And I think the idea of illegibility was really important for us, because playing with meaning and how language means and deconstructing that was really important, because it's a critique of language and a critique of patriarchal language or colonial language. So that was something that was very much a part of the show, especially kind of the way we position visual poetry at the beginning of the exhibit, which, thinking about, I hadn't thought about your work in visual poetry terms, but then as you both talked about it, I thought, wow, there's so much visual poetry here. And let's say you don't understand, right, the Spanish. I mean, there's a way in which those forms and the way that you structure the page means in and of itself, whether or not you understand the individual words. And then, the ways in which you think about mother as other and her, to me, is such a strategy that's related to kind of earlier, deconstructions of language.
And so for those of you who haven't been in the show, it really opens up with visual poetry as sort of posing questions about communication, language, the coloniality of language in the Americas. And well, if you haven't been, then hopefully you'll come on the tour and see. And that really underpins the rest of the exhibition, which is sort of putting into question how communication functions more broadly in terms of mail, messages, and all different forms of address that you find in the exhibition.
These are just trailers for you to come and see the show. But yeah, other questions?
Maybe on the tour?
Yeah. Oh,
here.
I guess out of all of the letters, like, as you said, like, they contain a lot of information, a lot of specificities. Which ones are the ones, what's your process of like choosing certain letters or certain like erasures in your case over others? Well, you talked a little bit about more and more erasures, but like also like which letters to choose, which letters to, keep in your drawer.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. I think if we could get one of the pictures of just like a bigger letter. Oh no. Sorry. I guess it's like the ones that like the poems that kind of resonated, that I felt were more open, like the telephone, a few minutes. El teléfono pocos minutos was kind of mysterious to me too, because that's not what the letter really was about, but it takes on a different meaning. But the letters also have dates. That's what I wanted to kind of show you. So this is June 2nd, 2003. June 2nd's my birthday. So, and then there was another letter that by coincidence was Eric Guerro's birthday. This is like kind of, so it was like, oh, and then there was like this, so there were like these weird coincidences that emerged from the process, because I did go into all of the letters. There was no discrimination in terms of like, oh, this letter is more special than this other letter. But as the process kind of happened, certain things just kind of felt like chance and interesting coincidences that would make, that had a certain resonance, that then when paired with the impact prints kind of, had some other kind of reflective, like there was like a reflection, like maybe the impact print in a way, like, had like a specific shape that the other letter kind of also had, like, and, kind of bringing those elements together. So some of those things were chance and compositional and things that would surface.
I've gone through it's so interesting to hear, because I've gone through my archive of letters, separating everywhere where I existed and everywhere where I didn't, because the letters were mostly written by my mom. And so there are letters where it's just her talking about her relationship with my father, and my brother and I are not a part of it. So I've separated into where my brother and I are present and then where we are not. And I've started then going through like what messages resonate the most with that we wrote. And And I am like in the very early stages of going through the letters. So for now, I'm exploring this idea of wanting to be together. And I hope I continue to explore these messages of reunification and longing to be together for another couple of years. Because in the other part of the letters, there is a lot of talk of my mother leaving me and not bringing me with her to the States because she wanted to be with my dad so badly. And that part of the letters is something that I'm not emotionally capable of getting to just yet. I unfortunately cannot have children. And so imagining a mother not caring about her children because she cares for a man more is just something that I will make artwork about in the future, but not now. And so I'm honoring that I'm not there yet. And I know that when I'm ready, that archive will be waiting for me. So I've separated the letters in that way. And I am also at the same time reading about migrant mothers. And one of my favorite books by Reina Grande talks about her relationship with her migrant mother. And it's given me a lot of empathy for migrant mothers. And I've gotten to understand the role of woman outside of being a mother. And so there's a lot of work to do there, but I'm not there yet. And so I hope that one day there will be room to explore that. But for now, there's like this simpler splitting of the letters.
Let's take the other questions in the galleries, I think, if we can.
Yeah. See you.
I know
Hopefully see you all
Great.
there. Thank you.
Thanks.